And you've just heard Walking Beside You, a single from Jonni Slater's new album, Between the Shadows, which is out now. And I'm so pleased to be joined by Jonni now. How are you doing? You all right?
Hi. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. And before we talk about the album more generally, can you tell us a bit about that track we just heard, Walking Beside You?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's one of the more recently written tracks on the album, and it was sort of in response to um, a prompt to write a song in the form of a letter to to anyone. It could have been, I guess, but a letter of apology.
Right.
And this is obviously quite a sort of provocative thing to get, quite a provocative sort of brief to work from in a way, and that it could take you down all sorts of dark paths potentially. But I mean, in this case, I sort of wrote a letter of apology to someone who means a lot to me for basically saying sorry for not being as supportive as I could have been in certain situations. So that's kind of how it started, and it started with that lyric. But then that felt like such a sort of um, I didn't want to make that too heavy for the listener. So I guess in playing around with chords and in trying to figure out the musical direction for it, I ended up going down a sort of a slightly sort of soulful kind of almost like Bill Withers inspired kind of direction. And I think that sort of, for me at least, that sort of lifts it back into a place where hopefully it's not too, heavy going for the listener and or for the people involved. So yeah, that's kind of how that came about.
It's interesting you say that because I've written down here "Lovely Day," the Bill Withers song, because it's
Okay.
kind of
Yeah.
it starts quite melancholy and then kind of changes as it goes along. And the other thing I've written down here is Michael McDonald. I think like, kind of
Okay.
his song, there's a kind of soulfulness to the voice as well as
Right.
the song itself. You said that you were asked to write this, so was that part of a kind of workshop?
Well, it was part of, yeah. So I've been going on these songwriting retreats that Becky Wallace, who I know you know,
Yeah.
organises. They're called Song Seeds. There, and for anyone who is a songwriter out there in Scotland or further afield, they're absolutely fantastic. If she runs more next year, which I hope she'll get funding to do again, very, very strongly recommend them. Just basically to go away for a week and spend some time in a really creative space with other like-minded people, and each day you sort of get a writing brief from somebody in the industry, somebody who's out there performing and releasing music, and you get something from their perspective about how they write music, and then they give you some sort of prompt that gets you going and starts your kind of creative flow. And it's a fantastic experience. It's the kind of thing you can't totally explain to someone until they've actually gone and done it and tried it. But it's such a sort of fulfilling thing to do. And yeah, so this came out of one of those songwriting briefs. And yeah, I mean, there's a couple of songs. There's, I guess, maybe three or four songs on the album that I've written at one of these song series retreats, because it's such a fertile kind of ground for new ideas. And the challenge is you write something in that day to perform that night to the rest of
Oh.
the group. So it's there's quite a pressure there to do something, and that really that kind of that works, as a creative impetus. It kind of gets you going.
It's so interesting. I've spoken to a few people over the last couple of months that have mentioned songwriting retreats.
Right.
And because in my head, a writer's retreat, I was thinking, writers of fiction or authors, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it seems to be quite a really helpful thing for writers to go away as a group and be challenged and challenge each other, but also support
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great thing about it as well is that I think there are people there who are all kind of stages in their songwriting journey, from people who are just starting out and trying to get the feel that yes, this is something I can do, to people who are really experienced and to who write. I mean, Becky in particular, she's so prolific and she writes so much fantastic stuff. It just kind of pours out of her. But everyone's in the same position, and it's just a great experience. I was really glad that I was introduced to that experience by my wife, actually. Yeah, it's great stuff.
And we said Walking Beside You was a single, and later on we're going to play Super, which was another single. And it got me thinking, how do you choose singles? What do you consider?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I think, to some extent, you're always thinking about, well, what's the most radio friendly thing
Mm,
here? But things can be radio friendly for different reasons, I guess. And in this modern age, it's also about streaming. Streaming is, if you believe the streaming services, streaming is sort of intended to take the place of radio to some extent.
yeah,
Um, and get out there and find a new audience. I mean, that's open for debate, but anyway, so there could be different reasons, I guess, why you might choose different songs. In this case, I guess I've chosen three of the sort of more up tempo. And bearing in mind that I was releasing them across the summer, I thought of kind of, I'll go for like a summer kind of sound,
yeah,
something that has got a good rhythm behind it, something that hopefully works on radio, but something that also kind of represents the rest of the album as well. I didn't want it to be just totally, um, something that is just unique on the album and doesn't represent the rest of what you've done. So yeah, it's a tricky choice, but Super was the first one that I released, and I wanted to sort of make an impact with that, and so I chose, I guess, one that has a sort of an interesting arrangement to it. It's not a standard sort of verse chorus
yeah.
structure either. Yeah, so and I think that worked. A video that I did for that well seemed to get some interest. So yeah, it's there's all kinds of reasons that you might choose a particular song over another, but yeah, in this case, it was sort of about those factors, I guess.
Super's a kind of great introduction because it kind of builds as a song to a kind of
Mm,
what I would call a celebratory kind of finish. It builds through it.
yeah.
It's a great introduction. In terms of the album as a whole, are there themes and ideas which kind of run through it?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess one of the main themes, the album's called Between the Shadows, and um, I guess it's about darkness and light. So it's
Mhm.
about sort of how we appreciate the light or the better times by also experiencing the other side, the darkness or the shadows or the perhaps the less good times or just yeah, the moments that don't stand out as highlights. There's that contrast, and somewhere between the two, you sort of find an equilibrium. So I guess there is that theme running through it. I think it's there can be different kind of reasons for or different approaches to writing an album, and some people might go into it in a very sort of focused way, deliberate process of like, well, I'm going to write an album, so and maybe they have a theme or maybe they don't, but they sort of write consistently and they record it and it goes out as a kind of a clear cut body of work. Whereas with this was kind of like, I guess, the other way, in that I wrote a load of songs over a period of time, a quite actually kind of a long period of time.
Right.
Um, and eventually it was like, well, I've got enough for an album here. But now I need to think about, yeah, what are the common themes? What are the common threads? Because that's going to influence how I record it as well, the sound that I'm looking for. Um, and so, yeah, that sort of theme of darkness and light influenced. I've gone for this sort of like quite. There's a lot of electric piano on there. There's also um, where I've recorded the real acoustic piano. It's that felt piano sound where you put a layer of felt in between the hammers
Right.
and the strings, and you get that really sort of rich, full sound, but it without so many of the sort of high frequencies. So you get quite a kind of rich, darker sound, which I absolutely love. So all those kind of considerations, I guess, went into the recording.
So, in a sense, there's kind of two ways of doing it. You write songs and then you realize you've got enough for an album or more, or you write songs for with an album at the end.
Yeah,
I'm going to write these. And so, does that mean in the way that you've written it that there are loads that haven't made it? There's lots of other songs that are,
there were a few. There were a few. There are a couple of that have sort of become. bonus tracks. So if you sign up for my mailing list, you'll get one of them as a bonus track. Just because I didn't feel like, I liked it, but I didn't feel it was quite strong enough or quite fit with everything else
Yeah.
to make it onto the album. So yeah, then you're in a position where you've got this whole load of work, and you just kind of pare it back to actually what makes a good record, a good 12 songs. Um, but yeah, I guess I've followed the other route in the past as well, and kind of written something quite deliberately, and that can be a really good way if you've got the focus to do it. But yeah, in this case, it built up gradually over time.
It's interesting. I guess there's no right or wrong way of doing it. It's just on a kind of song to song or album to album basis. And I've spoken to people who have recorded a few albums and they've chosen to record them differently, kind of every time, sometimes as
Right.
live, sometimes individually. How did you record this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's been recorded over a quite a period of time in a way, because I've done it as DIY as I could, but
Yeah,
also trying to get the sound that I really wanted through, whatever means that I could follow. So the piano where I recorded acoustic piano, that was all done in a studio. I went to 45 Aside studio in Glasgow, and recorded on a beautiful Yamaha piano there, which yeah, it had this ability that we could do the felt piano
hmm,
thing, so that was fantastic. But also when you took the felt off, it had this really quite forward, kind of quite present sound that really works on songs like Super, for example. So I knew I really wanted that. I wanted to record a real piano. Where in the past I've maybe used sample libraries and stuff like that to record that kind of thing. But then the other parts, a lot of them were done at home,
hmm,
just recording in my own home studio setup. Vocals, my own vocals, I recorded some at home. Some I went into a local recording studio, and I won't say the names or anywhere, but like I went into a recording studio and hired a room, and there was so much bleed from all the other rooms around me that I just couldn't get couldn't get a good live recording. So I ended up going back at like 6 in the morning and
right.
getting my vocals at some ridiculous hour of the day, because that was just the easiest way to do it. But I like the sort of DIY approach. I like having control over the recording process myself, um, and the mixing process as well. Which I guess it's like it swings and roundabouts. It can be I think it's a good thing in terms of the creative touches that you can put in, but sometimes you need that extra ear to kind of have a bit of objectivity about it and listen. So I guess it's a yeah, it's a balancing act.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's how it got recorded.
And are there other people on the record?
Yeah, there are. So there's three drummers on it. One, a guy called Joe Montague, who I found online, who's got both a fantastic kind of feel and a great recording setup. So I had him record a couple of tracks, and then a friend of mine called Doug Knight, who's in Woodwife and a bunch of other bands. Um, he also plays drums for My Momero. He did drums for it in a session that we recorded. And another guy who I knew back in Bristol a few years ago, he recorded some drums for that. And then I also got some backing vocals in. So Becky Wallace actually did some backing vocals for me, and so did Micah Segarist.
Mhm.
So fantastic to have their involvement as well, and it really kind of lifts it. I like doing a lot of my own backing vocals, but
Right.
obviously then you just get one flavor, and you don't get the variety that you get with other voices coming in. So I really wanted to add that in as well. But yeah, other than that, then it's mostly me, I guess.
Right. And we talked about the songs, you kind of picking songs that sort of work together thematically. Did you do that musically as well? We've heard that, that there's a kind of soulful influence on the two tracks that we're going to hear, but was that a consideration as well?
Yeah, it was. And I wanted a balance between, again, the theme of the album is sort of darkness and light. So I wanted a balance between songs that were a bit sort of more perhaps sunny and more positive, songs that were a bit darker. Um, I mean, there's nothing kind of really. I think, dark and dreary in there, but it's sort of like there's an element of hope in
Yeah,
everything. I think, that's kind of how I like to write. But equally, but some of them tackle sort of a slightly a theme that tends itself towards a darker sound, I guess. Um, so yeah, getting a balance between those was important to me through the record. Um, and yeah, and this sort of I knew that I wanted a certain palette of sounds. I didn't want to throw in too much because that's something I've definitely done in the past. I've just sort
right.
of kept adding more and more parts, more and more instruments to the point where it's just so swamped that you don't get the effect of the individual
Mm.
instruments, and something that you really liked originally that led you to write that song gets somehow lost in the mix. So yeah, that kind of thing was a consideration too. So I wanted to keep it relatively sort of simple and straightforward and not overcomplicate things.
And you're going to be playing live on Saturday the 15th at the Deep
Yeah,
End, is that right?
at the Deep End, yeah, which is between Pollock Shields West Station and Queen's Park Station,
Yeah, it is indeed.
sort of around Strathbungo area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nithsdale Drive, I think, is where it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and so what can people expect from the live set?
Yeah. It's the gigs being organised by Cloud Radio, the community sort of radio and podcasting outfit. And this is part of a new series of sort of concerts that they're planning to put on. It's an afternoon concert. It starts at 3:30. It's quite sort of, stripped back, relatively acoustic, but there are going to be elements of the sort of electronic sounds from the record as well in there. I'm hopefully going to have Doug, the drummer, with me,
Right?
and some backing vocals. So again, hopefully Becky and Micah are going to be joining me. Um, there's also a set from Mima Mero, who's fantastic,
Yeah.
as I'm sure you know. So I think it's going to be a great afternoon. And also as part of my set, I'm going to be doing I've been performing with sort of video projections of, I mean, I'm calling them short films, but essentially, footage that I've assembled and taken, that sort of matches the themes of the song, has some kind of narrative, or at least kind of takes you, gives you something. It kind of adds something more than just you're just hearing the music. You're also kind of watching something, that sort of matches and hopefully takes you somewhere, takes you on a little journey through the course of the song. So there's going to be all of that going on.
That sounds
Um,
amazing.
yeah.
And so not what you would call traditional videos, but more kind of inspired by the music.
Yeah, I mean, it varies track to track. So, but yeah, essentially they are sort of, rather than it being a classic kind of music video that is, kind of lots of fast cuts and lots of, kind of closely matching the music. It's more like it's creating a mood, it's creating a vibe, but it's also kind of, um, there are images that kind of from start to finish, they do present a sort of narrative and they do match the narrative of the song. Um, but yeah, it's kind of partly a backdrop and partly um, adding value to the music, I guess. Yeah.
Because you mentioned that you did a video for Super, and
Yeah.
I wonder how. So I think this week it was kind of announced that channels, TV channels, are kind of disappearing. I think MTV is nearly done, and
Right.
but so many people watch things on YouTube, which is obviously video as well. So I was wondering if you think that's still an important aspect of making music, is to have a visual side.
I think the visual side is important. I think it's not so much the case anymore that you have to have a full length video for your singles, for your releases. I feel like because everyone now is experiencing a lot more, that they consume a lot more short form content, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is another question,
Yeah.
but is a lot of people's experience now. And so I think to an extent the days of needing to do a full length video, which was the advice that people would have given, maybe 10 years ago, or maybe fewer years ago, I don't think is quite as necessary. I think you can, if you were to present, and I've done this with some clips that I've put out, you can kind of shoot what looks like you've taken from a full length video
Hmm.
for like 30 seconds of your of your audio, and people kind of get the same experience from that. It's something that draws them in, catches their eye when they're scrolling through, and hopefully draws them in to listen to the music as well. So from that point of view, it has a real value. But and it gives you another avenue to sort of create express yourself creatively, in addition just to the music.
I mean, so do you feel it is an important thing to kind of keep on top of how people are consuming music and the changes that are kind of constantly happening?
I mean, I guess to some extent it's inevitable that you sort of have to, but at the same time, I think, I mean, obviously there's a big backlash at the moment against streaming services, particularly Spotify,
Yeah.
and I think that's a good thing. Um, and so with my stuff, the singles are out on Spotify. Well, they're out on streaming services in
Yeah.
general. 'Cause
Yeah.
that's how my distributor works. But the album itself is going to be out. It's going to be available from me at gigs. It's going to be available on Bandcamp, where you got a slightly more direct relationship between fan and artist.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are sort of attending that way again.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hope we get to a point where there is a sort of a clear-cut route for that is artist empowered, and that allows you to kind of make that direct connection again with with fans, with people who might be interested in your music, without having to go through all these gatekeepers, without having to spend loads of money, without having to be supporting companies that you don't approve of their their politics, or what they're doing with the money that they're getting from people. I hope we get to that place again. But yeah, it's kind of difficult at the moment. I think
Yeah.
you're caught between a rock and a hard place of, you either use the platforms that are there, or you try and make it some other way, but with the realization that it's going to be harder work.
Yeah, I think that's right. But when I started doing Scots Whay Hae, bands or musicians would often send me CDs, with homemade covers and things like that. And then that kind of disappeared for a while. But I have to say, that seems to be coming back, that people are,
Yeah.
we've had the revival of vinyl, but I mean, you were very kind enough to send me a copy of yours as well, the album. But I wonder if that is beginning to come back, that people think what you mentioned about being DIY as much as possible, there's a
Yeah.
DIY aspect to getting your music into people's hands as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you have to just look for those avenues where you can hopefully reach people directly. I think that's the most rewarding experience for both sides, really. And yeah, I mean, I've heard that CDs are coming back. You know, who that's driven by, I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, there's been sort of a rebellion against streaming to some extent, and we just have to see where that goes, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonni, it's been so interesting talking to you. Thanks so much for taking the time to do so.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me on.
And this is Jonni Slater and Super.